Talk of more tax cuts brings the conversation back to the nation's trillion-dollar deficit. Joining us right now to talk about the budget and tackling shortfalls is Ohio Senator Rob Portman. He serves on the Budget Committee. He also served as White House Budget Director under President George W. Bush. And Senator, great to see you. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Beck. Thanks for having me on.
All right, let's talk a little bit about this. You're somebody who knows budgets inside out. What do you think of the president's latest budget?
Well, first, just for a second, on the corporate tax cuts, as you know, the vast majority of the corporate side was made permanent. So when you're looking at the rate, you're looking at the territorial system, which are the two biggest changes. Those are permanent. In other words, they're part of the tax law until changed. Although the point was made about R&D, that's certainly true. But it's so bipartisan, I think that's probably something that can continue to provide economic growth. On the budget, you know, the budget's a blueprint. It's a message document. It does do some cuts on a small part of the budget, which is about 14.5% of the budget, which is the part we appropriate every year outside of defense. So the
things like education, environment, things like that.
Yeah,
that's where some of the big cuts are coming.
So that's sort of the message this year is, as the president has said, he's not going to be touching the major entitlement programs, so Social Security and Medicare in particular. But he did want to get to a balanced budget over 15 years, which he does in this budget, and that's how it's done. But the reality is that, you know, we've got to do something with regard to the mandatory spending side on a bipartisan way, because that's the only way it'll happen. And everyone acknowledges that. It's now 70% of the budget in effect on autopilot, and it's just not sustainable. And Democrats are saying we want to add to that. So the Medicare for All, there's a right-leaning group and a left-leaning group that's looked at Bernie Sanders' proposal there. Both of them come in at, north of $30 trillion. $30 trillion. So it's just not affordable, and I think everybody acknowledges that.
But, Rob, how frustrated are you? I mean, you can say the Democrats have these huge plans to blow out spending. How frustrated are you that it's a Republican administration and their own plans don't tackle any of the fixed costs that you just mentioned?
Well, it's frustrating that, you know, as a group here in Congress, we're sort of choosing to ignore this reality, and whoever gets elected as president a year from now will step into office and will have at his or her doorstep this issue. So I do think, we've talked about this before, that it'd be smart to have some sort of a group that gets together now and says, okay, on a bipartisan basis, what could you do? What are the options at least? So that when whoever gets elected hits the ground running on this issue, they have some ideas out there. Because it's the biggest fiscal issue we face. We've got a great economy right now. Revenues are coming in. In fact, this year, it's projected revenues will be up 4.9%, 6% up last quarter. So it's not about revenues. They are actually increasing up and above the historic average as a percentage of GDP. It's about the spending.
But Senator, let me ask you a couple of things in this budget. Presidential budgets are always kind of infamous for relying on some budget predictions that never pan out to be the case. In 2011, Obama's budget actually called for 4% growth. That's not a number they ever got anywhere near. This time around, President Trump's budget is calling for, I believe, 3% growth, which is a little lower than they had been anticipating in the last year's budget. How likely do you think we're going to see 3% growth for the better part of the next decade?
Well, the budget projections are always a little rosy on the economic growth front, but let's also realize that pre-tax cuts and post-tax cuts, everybody's economic growth numbers were way too low. So they are accurate when the administration says that both CBO and other forecasters had been way too low in terms of the budget projections and in terms of the revenue projections and in terms of the jobs projections. So, but you're right. It's a little rosy in terms of economic growth.
All right. Let me throw one more at you. The idea that our debt costs won't increase, that we're not going to see higher rates over the next, 10, 15, 20 years on some of these issues. How likely is that when we're looking at these low rates? Obviously, these rates have been here for a while, but is that a fair projection in your point?
You know, I think a couple years ago people would have said no, that just can't continue. And now, even with an economy that's hitting on just about all cylinders, and you have what you think would be wage pressure and so on. You have wages going up. The last 15 months, we've had wage increase of 3% or more every single month. You have to look back to 2001 to see that again. So it hasn't affected rates. So my sense is that there's some new economic thinking out there, which is when you look around the globe and you look at the United States, rates are staying low, regardless of growth rates.
All right, Senator, we saw the president acquitted by the Senate. Now we're seeing some of the things that the president is doing. He's mad, obviously, and he is exacting. I think some people might characterize it as getting some revenge here and there. I've seen comments from Schumer, Pelosi, Adam Schiff. They're more dug in than they've ever been. I mean, they're talking about maybe another impeachment at some point. Should the American people think anything is going to get done with the way these two sides are right now, the president on one side and Democrats on the other, I mean, ripping things up? And it just doesn't, I mean, obviously nothing till November, but even after November, how is this ever going to be something where we move forward and have people on both sides of the aisle voting for the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, the partisanship is discouraging, no question about it. But in a way, it's in the interest of both sides to do exactly what we ought to be doing, which is to start to pass some legislation. If you're Nancy Pelosi and looking at your House majority and you want to get reelected, what can you turn to as a real accomplishment? Well, one would be prescription drugs. Same with Republicans over here to look at prescription drug costs. We've got 3 committees that reported bills out. The House has their own legislation. The president said he wants to sign something. Infrastructure is another opportunity. There's obviously a bipartisan interest in fixing our crumbling roads and bridges. We've passed something out of committee on a unanimous vote here in the Senate on that issue. The question is how to pay for it, which we're working on. But my point is, I think in a way, although the partisanship is discouraging and the war of words is leading you to believe nothing can get done, on the other hand, I think it's in both parties' interest to try to actually accomplish some things. Are you
an uncomfortable Republican senator with the president, or are you comfortable now? You didn't vote for him the first time. Are you going to vote for him in 2020?
Joe, you keep reminding me of that. Yeah, I'm going to vote for him, and I'm helping him back home. I'm endorsing him. Look, I cannot believe the change we've seen in terms of our economic growth, in terms of our regrowth of restoring our military strength. I mean, we've done a lot of great things, and you look at the policy front. I think the president's in pretty good shape to be reelected, and I'm very pleased, obviously, with a lot what we've done in terms of the tax reform, not just the tax cuts, but reforming our tax code. We talked about that earlier with the territorial system and just making America more competitive again and more investment in my state and other states. So wages are up for the first time in Ohio for a decade and a half. And when you add these, 3% up year to year, it makes a real difference in people's lives. So I think there's a lot of good stuff going on.
Do you think that you made a mistake in not endorsing him the first time then?
I did endorse him. And then after the tape came out, I said I was going to vote for Mike Pence instead. But look, I think the point is going forward, we've got to figure out how to pull together as a country and solve some of these big problems. And we talked about the mandatory spending. There are lots of other issues out there that can and should be addressed. And some of them aren't that partisan. I mentioned 2 of them, infrastructure and prescription drugs, but there are others as well. The opioid crisis, how we deal with that. Our worker training challenge we have. What I hear around Ohio is the #1 issue right now is workforce. We've got a great bipartisan bill called the Jobs Act to get that back on track by providing short-term training programs, giving people industry-recognized credentials so they can get into the workforce. There are a lot of areas where we can do things together.